on today's episode.
The second thing that comes to my mind is something that I confess that I am somewhat ashamed that I'm not so good at myself. But it's courage, the courage to actually talk about these things. Even people on the other side of the issue have remarked on how amazing it is that with the Obergefell decision, support for same-sex marriage in the United States flipped within about a year. Yeah. When they did the polling. It went from like 40% for and 60% against to 60% for and 40% against or something like that. But still, when they do surveys, there's still a significant portion of the United States that says this should not be. And part of the reason it's not more, that figure that's opposed isn't bigger is because the people who are opposed to it, who say this is wrong, this is not good, have been so cowed that they're not talking about it. Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Our world today presents people with complicated issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. It can be a struggle to understand or deal with them. We're here to help by bringing good information and a fresh biblical perspective to these matters and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastors Bob Fleischman and Jeff Samuelson. And today we're going to talk about children and marriage, and specifically the tension with traditional versus untraditional marriage. And so, Jeff, you had kind of brought this topic to our attention today. Do you want to maybe start talking about some of it? Yeah,
I thought I'd lead with something that I came across in the Washington Post. There's a weekly parenting advice column, and this is from March 25th. The headline is, "During lead up to X's monthly visits, my 10-year-old is so mean to me." And the letter begins, "Dear Megan, I'm dealing with difficult behavior related to anxiety in my 10-year-old. We have been through a lot of emotional growth over the last few years, following a family separation and divorce, and all over again after his other parent moved out of state. His other parent visits about once a month, and the week leading up to the visit is marked with increased disagreeableness, rudeness, and finding any small reason to argue with me. I'm proud I can now recognize this as anxiety, anticipating a transition, and keep myself regulated and my heart open. I try to give him opportunities to express those feelings outright, but it's hard for him, and his go-to is just to be mean and sometimes even aggressive. He craves control, and these visits mean his schedule is set for him in many ways, where they stay, who they see, etc. But he also needs to learn that adapting and doing things he doesn't want to do is part of life. How do I validate those feelings and let some of it go given the circumstances, while shutting down the aggression and avoiding becoming his punching bag? It's hard to know that he feels so stressed inside, and it's also hard to accept this treatment, especially given I'm the parent who stayed and sees him through the tough stuff. For what it's worth, he sees a therapist but doesn't really share the deep stuff. He avoids feelings talk as much as possible, though I do try the strategy of talking in the car or on a bike ride to make it feel less intense." Now, I'm going to stop reading for a second here. And I think just about everybody reading this kind of has this picture in their mind. Maybe they're thinking of people they know who might be in a similar situation, and they're thinking, oh, okay, well, this is probably what I would advise in this situation. Or, yeah, it's terrible what happens with divorce, and I can understand that. But then, the next line, "He has a good relationship with his other mom, but I know he feels a sense of disappointment and sadness about her relocation, which is triggered regularly. He's a very perceptive kid. We talk openly about all the things, and we're very close. Why is he so mean to me?" Signed, Punching Bag. It's not until that second to last line there we realize, oh, this is not a traditional marriage. This is two moms who had a relationship, got married, and got divorced. And suddenly, it's a whole new set of issues here. Because we're not just talking about, okay, yeah, there's mom and there's dad, and at least the kid, even though mom and dad are separated, still has a mom, still has a dad. But this is a boy who has never had a father. And he's 10 years old. No wonder he doesn't know how to behave in this moment. because he's never had the things that a father is supposed to bring to the home. And all he's had is two moms, and apparently one of them decided to move away. And there's just so much more here. And I will not read the columnist's response, but I will tell you it does not address this issue. For someone who's sensitive to this kind of thing, which I would hope we all are, to realize that there is a much, much more fundamental issue here than how this 10-year-old boy is being mean to the mom who stayed. There are decisions that were made 10, 11 years ago that have doomed this child, hopefully not permanently, but at least now, to living a life that will never be complete in the way that God designed it to be complete. I brought this up just because this is precisely the kind of thing that a group or a movement that has come on the scene recently is trying to draw people's attention to. It's a group called Them Before Us, and they've started a campaign that they're calling the Greater Than campaign. And basically what this is they're saying we need to correct the societal mistake that has been made of advancing adults' desires over children's needs. And specifically saying in allowing same-sex marriage and same-sex adoption and, all those kinds of things as well, and a lot to do with surrogacy and things like that, that this has been an abandonment of society's responsibility towards children, and that we need to be putting children first before us as adults. And the Greater Than campaign is the idea that what's important for children is greater than what's important to adults.
I suspect that at the heart of this is the commodification of children. In other words, we begin to choose when I want to have a child and when I don't want to have a child. We, as a nation, want the right to even terminate the life of a child in the womb rather than letting the child be born. The child really is subordinate to the desires of the parents, and that's not to be confused with who's in charge. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that biblical concept has, when children come into the picture, Scripture is always talking about your focus is to be on the children, the training of the children, the way they should go, and so forth. But really, what we're seeing today is a seismic shift into really what mom or moms or dad or dads want. And the child has almost become a pawn in the game. And this is even far beyond the ramifications of divorce. I mean, mm-hmm. This has gotten to be to the point where even when you get discussions about whether children can choose their gender, choose their pronouns, all that kind of stuff, it's kind of like, no, everyone's a separate human being. You have no responsibility beyond yourself. It's your life. You make the choices you want. And it's a bankrupt philosophy. And it's a bankrupt psychology. And so now, we have a society that's scrambling, trying to prove that, no, we're okay. We're okay if we do this. And I think a lot of times Christians sometimes get kind of drawn into it. They like, well, to each their own, it's not for me, but, but no, when you create. And this is something that went on back. I remember when they were working to legalize assisted suicide, when Jack Kevorkian was doing his thing back in the early 90s, the whole idea was, well, if that's what they want to do, okay, that should be fine. But no. When you create a society that accepts a mentality that at some point you should be able to just get rid of yourself and your own life, it permeates, it trickles down, it touches other lives. And then pretty soon, you have a life that's not as productive as it used to be, and you become burdened with it. Well, now translate that to children. Mm-hmm. You've got children who, really, if you could decide what you want to be for yourself, then I can as the parents. And there's no sense of responsibility to anybody else. That's problem number one, no sense of responsibility to anybody else. And secondly, no standard as to what's right or wrong. And so what is wrong with the way you're thinking? It's not based on a reliable standard. It's based on a notion.
And Bob mentioned how there are a lot of Christians today who have just been kind of like, oh, well, it's not bothering me and seems to be okay. And part of what prompted this or has helped this along with Christians in our society, most Western societies today, with same-sex marriage has been the idea of like, well, maybe we don't approve of it, but there's no real harm done. These people want to live the lives that they want to live. And one of the articles that prompted my particular attention to this was also from the Them Before Us group. It was entitled Exposing the Rigged Research of the Same-Sex Parenting Movement. And it calls attention to a study that was before the Obergefell ruling that from the Supreme Court that legalized same-sex marriage across the U.S. And there's a Cornell University study claimed that 75 out of 79 studies show that children of gay or lesbian parents fare no worse than other children, which just happened to be ready on the eve of that Supreme Court decision. And that the message is unmistakable. 75 out of 79 studies say no difference. Therefore, the science is settled, the debate is over, and the research supposedly proves there's no harm. But this article goes on to point out in great detail that 75 out of 79 is just bad science, and the claim itself is nonsense. In fact, the studies will show, when you get to actual good studies, scientifically verifiable and everything like that, it shows the exact opposite, that children are harmed growing up in same-sex households. In fact, they mentioned even one study where they actually, whereas children, in same-sex households where the parents weren't married did poorly, they did even worse when those were same-sex parents were married. And it was just, it's like, wow. And it's like, boy, you'd hope that if this had been publicized back then that, it might have made a difference. I don't know that it would have, but I think it's sure helpful information to have now to recognize that these were lies. And there are plenty of people who believe this. They're convinced that the science is on their side. And so a first step is saying, well, actually, and going to evidence like this, articles like this, and saying, well, see, actually, this is the case. And so what you thought was a done deal really shouldn't be a done deal. And maybe it's something we should try undoing.
When I went onto the Cornell website and I looked at what they wrote, and then I examined the way they portrayed it. It's very attractively done. It's kind of clever the way they did it. Cornell even acknowledges, if you bury into the fine print, that the studies really they're not large studies. Let's just say you would not want to base your cancer treatment based on the way that they did these studies, because they were small studies, they were biased studies and so forth. But what was interesting is in the fine print, they do say that. They do acknowledge it. But then at the bottom, kind of like their concluding statement, nice bold letters, kind of what you just said, the conclusion that, 75 out of 79 studies say it's really no difference. And of course, you're going, no, you just got done saying that your entire framework doesn't really support the conclusion, but you still point the conclusion out, which is a thing called, in research, it's called confirmation bias. And we all do it. We all kind of develop a bias and you begin to look for it. So we saw it during questions about vaccines and so forth, where, different sides are looking for, endorsement of their position. And once they find an endorsement goes up, they'll post it on their page and so forth. And that's kind of what happened here, is that you get this mentality that, there's a couple and they're happy together. They happen to be the same sex. They want to be husband and wife. They want to have children. And of course, we're moving, those of you who are following technology, we're moving into the direction with surrogacy and IVF and all that kind of stuff, that same-sex couples can have children. There might even be the day where we could just simply take cells and reduce them back into their pluripotency level, and they could actually have the same genetic child, the identical genetic child as the one parent. And just all of this crazy stuff. They're all moving in that direction. And of course, the one victim of it all is the child. Mm-hmm. And the other thing, so that's one thing. There's a confirmation bias, but there's the other thing, and that is, the conclusion is that there's no problem. Based on what standard? No problem based on what? Living for the world? Living for non-traditional marriages? Well, okay, you could find those studies and support it, but we were all created to glorify God. That's So we live by a different standard. And so when Christians read this kind of stuff, even if the studies were all right, let's just say they were all correct, and they were done on a huge scientific level, and there was virtually no difference, except for one little problem, and that is, this is contrary to the will of God. And the only way that you could get around it is to start rewriting the Bible, kind of doing a Thomas Jefferson version of your own Bible. You pull out the parts you don't like, you keep the parts that you like, and you got your own Bible.
That's a very popular approach to the Bible, by the way.
Yes, it is.
It's not ours, but it's a popular one.
Yep.
There's this, I think, push too of all a child needs is love, right? Like just loving parents, whoever that is. And then it does seem like now that the research, or some people like are just trying to prove that, like we just want to prove that all you need is love, and all you need is a loving home, and all you need are loving parents. And I think one of the founders of this group, that them before us, is Katie Faust.
Yeah.
And I've heard her on YouTube and just different things too talk about stuff, and she's very, very fascinating. And she was raised, I believe, with a lesbian mom, or and a partner too,
Yeah.
and so has that experience from it. But one of the things that I found really interesting in listening to her talk was she said, there are really three things that sociologists have agreed on. And I mean, even if you remove just the whole same-sex parenting aspect, there's three things that generally people have agreed on for a long time. The first being that biological parents are invested in a way that other people aren't, like with their children.
Mm-hmm.
And the second being that, there are differences in parenting between a man and a woman, and, the woman maybe being more nurturing and compassionate, and the man, providing that security and discipline, and that when that is done well, that is best for the child, to have both of those influences. And then the third thing that is, good for a child, or the third thing that impacts a child, is parental loss. And so however that loss comes about, like whether it is a parent dying, a parent leaving, a divorce situation, and how that is very traumatic for the child. And she says too, like that basically with these, when people are advocating for same-sex parenting, they've taken all three of those things and just thrown them out the window, and say, well, that doesn't matter in this situation. In this situation, all that matters is love. And I just found that really interesting too, to just hear her explain that, because we as Christians too, and like what Bob was saying, I mean, if nothing else for us, it's that this is the way God intended, right? Like this is God's design. But God's design is because it's good for us. Like there's good in God's design. And that's just really, really neat.
When a friend or loved one loses a baby, it's hard to know what to say or do. It's natural to feel unsure, but your caring presence matters. Christian Life Resources offers tools to help you respond with grace, compassion, and Christ-centered care. Our miscarriage, stillbirth, and infant loss resources help you understand what grieving parents need and how to lovingly walk beside them in faith. You can also request a special care box filled with comforting items and biblical encouragement. With every word, prayer, and gesture, God's love shines through. Visit ChristianLifeResources.com for all you need to show Christ's love through presence, prayer, and gentle understanding.
Well, the studies consistently point to a very strong worldview, which is you replace truth with a worldview concept of love. And of course, the world concept of love is not the biblical agape concept of love. It's the concept of phileo love, which is still loving, compassionate, emotional love. It's not all a negative, but the world's concept of love is further tainted with kind of almost like a necessary reciprocal thing. In other words, I love you as long as you love me back. I love you as long as I get some benefit or pleasure from it. And the moment that disappears, then I don't have that parental love anymore, which parental love involves commitment, which is, I think, a very strong component of agape love, and that is that you are committed to it. And that's, that statement, Krista, where you said biological parents have a vested interest, that's my flesh and blood involved here. And of course, we begin to lose that. And the world constantly is wanting to twist the way it looks at things in order to get away with the things it want to get away with. I remember early on, right, after the legalization of abortion, there were reports of a rise in child abuse. And the argument was, well, the reason that there's a rise in child abuse is we've just gotten better at reporting it. And nobody wanted to deal with the question of, did the ability or the legalization of being able to kill your unborn child have a negative effect on appreciating child? Well, logic would tell you that if I could have killed you before and I didn't, and now I got you and now you're not what I wanted, that shouldn't I at least be allowed to treat you the way I want to treat you? I mean, there is a hard, cold logic to it that nobody wants to talk about. But the thing that I'm troubled about is when the world even says, well, love is what we're all centered around, is that no one's ever asked to define love, and upon which standard do they define love? So love for you means I want to love somebody as a spouse who happens to be the same sex. And love for someone else means I need to beat you with a strap until you comply. Now, which love is the right love? Or are they both right, just subjective? And what makes one kind of love right and one kind of love wrong? And lacking an objective authority, it's becoming a Wild West. And you see it in everything. And I can see a perfect storm of the combination of technology and the ability, procreative technology, IVF, surrogacy, stem cell research, all the kinds of things that we can do that begins to mess with and alter reproduction. And then you throw in CRISPR, the ability to cut and splice and dice, and then moving from curative to enhancement technology. And now you throw in AI. And then, back in the back quadrant, you've got quantum computing coming, which is going to just massively increase the speed and computational ability to accomplish things. And then you throw in latest advancements in creating three-dimensional skin and so forth, and artificial life and all of this kind of stuff. You start throwing all that into the mix. Who's going to get their way? Who's going to finally determine that my version of love is better than your version of love? Like Krista said, we were designed this way because God said it's for your own good. And we're having trouble accepting that.
Yeah, this, and both of you talked about this elevation of a defective idea of love is part of how same-sex marriage got accepted, not just legally, but societally, and even largely among Christians. It's just like, oh, well, as long as they love each other, and they redefined marriage that way. Marriage just became the way the two people who are really close to each other show that they love each other. It's the ultimate commitment there. And I think it's Ryan Anderson in his book Truth Overruled made the point that the difference is that they're treating marriage as something that is different in degree from other relationships. I mean, there's love, we love each other as friends, and then there's, we really love each other, and that's marriage. But marriage is actually different in kind from every other relationship. It's in a completely different category, and it's not based on love. If marriage were based entirely on love, then every arranged marriage that has ever existed would not be a real marriage, and nobody's going to argue that. Or, and for that matter, when two people fall out of love, then suddenly they no longer have a marriage, even if they're not, it's just a really messed up way to try to define it, but it's a convenient one. because it feels good for the people who are taking advantage of it, and it feels good for everybody else who gets to say, "Hell, wow, I'm so accepting, I'm so open-minded and everything like that I don't have a problem with whatever they want to do, and this way I don't have to worry myself over it." Well, I'm sorry, as Christian citizens of a nation, we should worry ourselves over it. Well, okay, be concerned, because Christians don't worry. But this is something that should matter to us. And I have not seen it in print anywhere. I haven't done a deep dive to know if it's true or not. I suspect that one of the reasons for the timing of this movement is a hope that if they can get something before the Supreme Court, it will be while the court is composed as it is, and they'd have more of a chance of getting a favorable decision rather than wait until there's been a changeover in justices, and that would be less likely. That's just a suspicion on my part. But there's still an urgency regardless, because the longer this goes on, the harder it is to undo it. People will have come to rely on the fact that people of the same sex can get married and have children and things like that. And if we were to undo it, it would be very difficult. That's not to say it shouldn't be done, but it would still be very difficult. And the sooner it's done, the less trouble it'll be. But
one of the consequences of this is kind of almost the marginalizing of the Christian view of things, to the point where it went from being prominent and predominant to being hated. At this recording of this podcast, Artemis, the spacecraft, is coming back from, going around the moon. And just before it entered into the darkness, one of the astronauts quoted scripture and so forth. I was reading this morning the hatred that was spewed by the atheists who felt that was just terrible and horrible and so forth. And see, you have to understand that when the world is promoting its idea of love, they are doing it with the tools that they have, which is an evil inclined heart that's naturally opposed to God. So don't think that their version of love is, well, you've got your thing, I've got my thing. Sometimes Christians foolishly talk that way, but the other side isn't thinking that way, not at all. Because if you don't buy in hook, line, and sinker to their view of things, you are now classified as a threat. And we see that the Christian position seen as a threat to free speech, to free living, all that kind of stuff. This is the marginalization, because they're saying, well, the only thing holding children back from being fully adjusted and accepted in society are the closed-minded views of, and a lot of times they fill in the blank with religion or Christians or Muslims even and stuff like that. But the reality is they need to squelch any objective standard so that everyone can do what they want. And then they think that everyone doing what they want is going to work. And there is no evidence whatsoever. Find me, I challenge anybody. And if you are the kind looking to send hate mail, this is it. Send it. You prove to me from history that you let different people all choose for themselves what's right and wrong. Prove to me that works. There isn't. I'm a history buff. I know of no example where that works.
The only example I could think of where would be somebody living all alone on a desert island. But even then, it's not going to work out very well, because you're going to make bad decisions.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Because we're sinful people. And getting back, to the children again, that's I think when we recognize, and particularly as Christians, but I think you can certainly make a secular argument for this as well, that embracing same-sex attraction and going all in on that reflects something that is wrong, something that is off. It's not the way we're supposed to be. It's not the normal. It's not the design, the good design that God gave us. It's just going to get more wrong when you solidify that with the same-sex marriage. But then what happens when you entrust a child to somebody who has already taken the deep dive into wrongness? That's not the situation where you want to say, oh, okay, yeah, I think that's a good place to put a child. And none of this is to say that by the world's standards, at least, you can be gay and be a good father. You can be a lesbian and be a good mother. You can be responsible. You can be loving. You can look out for your child, put your child's interest first. But one thing that cannot ever be true is a gay man cannot be a good mother. And a lesbian woman cannot be a good father. And children, to the extent that it's possible, should have both. This is not to condemn situations where people end up in single parenthood. It's not to say that there isn't a place for adoption in cases where otherwise the child is going to linger in a foster home or orphanage or something like that. But to deliberately deprive children of a mother or a father simply to satisfy your desire to have something that you think you ought to have. I mean, that's cruelty. And it's just, and we can't justify it in any legitimate way. One of the other articles that had prompted this for me was he talks about manufactured orphans as a result of these relationships. Because this is particularly true in a really bad way in cases of surrogacy, because then the mother is the actual biological mother, isn't even in the picture. Or then maybe you've got two mothers, because you've got the one who carries the child and you've got the one whose egg it was. And in both cases, that child, when he or she grows up, is told, well, yeah, there were two women involved, but they have nothing to do with you. They were all okay with the deal we made.
As Christians, I do think, like most people probably listening to our podcast, are bothered by it. And so now what? Like what to do from there?
I want to pitch for something that's going to sound frustrating to a lot of people, and that is Christians and the church need to display their faith, need to proclaim their faith, need to always be pointing to what life is really all about, glorifying God, praising God for the gift of salvation through Christ. And the problem is that it doesn't produce the kinds of things that makes the world all excited. This morning was the news that our Supreme Court in the state is going to have one more very liberal judge on it, and the state Supreme Court's view on abortions pretty much tanked for a while. It's just going to be a problem. It's a problem if you were trusting that human beings were going to be the solution of everything. If you have a court, an entire court full of nothing but evil-inclined, corrupt judges, if you have an entire legislature full of evil-inclined, corrupt representatives and senators, and you had a nation full of Christians who boasted that my God is the true God who saved me through Christ, do you think it would make a difference? I think it would make a tremendous difference. But the problem is I was watching, the liberal churches were mobilizing, getting out the votes so that we could be sure to get our liberal judges and legislators in. Some of the conservative activist churches were trying to mobilize their people to get it in and everything. Judicial rulings, I've lived long enough to see them flow with the wind. I mean, they go this way, then they go that way, and then they come back this way, then they go that way. And of course, if you can't get legislatures to flim-flam on it, you can get judges to do it. And if you can't get judges to do it, there's always the executive order route. You can try all sorts of things. The problem is that we've always had the solution in every home, in every nightstand in the hotel, Gideon's Bible. The solution's always been there, but we just have never felt empowered enough to do it. And yet it's the one thing, and we're told in Scripture, you don't fight with the world's weapons. You've got a higher calling. And I don't know why. I sometimes am embarrassed that there were times over the last number of decades where I haven't imagined strategic worldly action to bring about change.
Yeah, in answering the question what to do about it, obviously pray. So that's the first step for always, and a continuing step always. The second thing that comes to my mind is something that I confess that I am somewhat ashamed that I'm not so good at myself, but it's courage, the courage to actually talk about these things. even people on the other side of the issue have remarked on how amazing it is that with the Obergefell decision, support for same-sex marriage in the United States flipped within about a year.
Yeah.
When they did the polling, it went from like 40% for and 60% against to 60% for and 40% against or something like that. But still, when they do surveys, there's still a significant portion of the United States that says this should not be. And part of the reason it's not more, that figure that's opposed isn't bigger is because the people who are opposed to it, who say this is wrong, this is not good, have been so cowed that they're not talking about it. I think, well, everybody's for it. I can't actually say anything about it. And there are court cases and such in various places where people get in trouble for taking this stand. But we as Christians have to be willing to say the right thing about the right issues and things like that. It doesn't mean you go looking for trouble. It doesn't mean you can't be diplomatic or tactical or strategic or whatever in the things that you say and whom you say them to and in what context or whatever. But at least be willing to take a stand and say, no, I don't think that's a good idea. I think this was a mistake. And by the way, here's my evidence for this. And this is why I believe this. And you don't have to say this is me shoving religion down your throat. Here's all the actual statistics, the data that supports this. And here's the historical argument that shows that this is an aberration that should not be, continued. We need to be educated and be ready to talk about it. And only after we've made some progress there can we really seriously expect to see, legislation and court opinions and things like that going the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll tell you, the spiritual maturity to have that courage doesn't come from sitting in church 1 hour a week and then kind of leaving it there. It's taken for us a lifetime of study and then still feel like a coward at times. But it's a lot easier to campaign for the way of the world because everyone has an evil inclination, but not everyone has experienced the rebirth of Christ. So, the numbers are probably against you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to feel, and everything in Scripture says you're going to have troubles, you're going to have trials, you're going to have tribulations, but you need the courage. And the reality is you're not wrong. You are right. And you're right not because you've got these brilliant analytical skills. You're right because God's Word declares it to be right. It's really a test of your confidence in God. I do think Christians have trouble navigating life in a representative form of government. I think I keep thinking that whenever I read what I see from fine Christian people who write with hand-wringing whenever we lose an election or a referendum, and it's kind of like, woe is me, all is lost, but we'll keep fighting, that kind of thing. You still have the winning formula, but I think we got to learn how to do it. And I do believe you need to know this information. You need to get it out there. But it's not a method of just what to do. It's also the methodology of how you do it. Are you building a bridge or are you building a wall?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'll just add to my comment and building actually on what Bob's saying. If you're looking for the place to start, it's probably not going to be on Facebook. It's probably not going to be going and testifying before Congress. Good place to start to get comfortable talking about these things is in your church and with other Christians or whatever, to actually be to the point of saying, yeah, that decision really was bad, wasn't it? Isn't it great that we know the truth about this? Isn't it wonderful that we can support children and families in this way? To get used to talking about it there as the really good thing that it is that God has given to us. And when you get more comfortable with that, you're going to have more comfort and courage talking about it with other people as well.
And hearing Jeff say that just reminded me of the podcast we did with Clark Schultz and Stella Zarling. I still hear Stella talk about, because I said in that podcast, I said, so Clark, does this incredible sermon, wonderful sermon, and then congregation goes home, it gets undone at home, just people not doing it. I said, how were you able to avoid that? And Stella's talking about mealtime was hour and a half, 2 hours, and they would all sit around the table and they would talk about these very controversial issues. And, if you come off kind of self-righteous with, the answer's simple, you don't abort children or you don't have gay marriage or anything, understanding. And then the parents would throw out the contrary arguments to see how the family navigated it. And I think that, we need a safe spot in our homes and in our congregations to have those kinds of conversations so that we could feel bold. I mean,
Bob loves it every time somebody talks about being a devil's advocate.
Yeah, I do. The moment you think it's easy, then I like to have somebody throw a spin in. So
no, I mean, I think that's all really true too. And when we get comfortable talking to, like you said, in our churches with our own people, with our own families about these things, where people can challenge arguments and we can kind of falter a little bit, but also, get stronger in that is going to make us stronger when we go out into the world as well. So, well, thank you both for this discussion today. And we thank all of our listeners too. And if you have any questions on this topic, please reach us at lifechallenges.us. We'll see you back next time. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're here to help, so if you have questions on today's topic or other life issues, you can submit them, as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. You can find past episodes and other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so please check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.